outside of craft beer nerd circles and brewing forums, one of the most recognizable beers has to be Guinness, which based on its oil-like appearance is viewed by many as being the polar opposite of the pale, fizzy yellow swill most of us are accustomed to. Indeed, despite its popularity, Irish Stout has developed an erroneous reputation of sorts for being heavy, filling, and quicker to escort one to the spirit world. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this episode, contributor Malcolm Frazer is with me to chat about this deliciously misunderstood style.
There's no real leap-off point for when Irish Stout became what at least the BJCP started calling the dry Irish Stout. You know, some people will harken back to like perhaps Michael Jackson, the beer writer, his descriptions of it, but you know, this intrigues me. I love the idea of stout and porter because you can't talk about stout without talking about porter. Yeah. But man, the more you research it, I have to admit I don't know where they what they are. You know? Well, I know what they are in modern sense. I know if you pour me a beer now and you say what is this, I'm probably apt to describe it if it were a Guinness, for example, as a dry Irish stout or at least an Irish stout. But when that exact leaping off point became, the more I research it, the less I think I know. Yeah.
And we're going to get into the history of this really interesting style. I think it's got such a rich history. One of the things when I think about Irish Stout or anything that's termed stout, that, you know, it used to not be a style. That was actually a description, right? I mean,
it's an adjective, yeah.
An adjective to describe the beer. So, in the beginning of my beer drinking days, I wasn't really a huge fan of Irish Stout, but I've kind of developed a really big appreciation for the style and tend to brew a couple batches every year. I think like a lot of people, I like to have one on tap around March or so. In addition to discussing the history of this age-old style, we're going to be talking about traditional methods for brewing Irish Stout, as well as the results of our attempt to make one short and shoddy style. We got a lot of positive feedback about our previous short and shoddy episode on Hoppy Pilsner, so we figured we'd make it a more regular thing here on the show. Please let us know what you think. If you like this stuff or not, you can do that by leaving a review in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Those ratings and reviews really do take no time at all for you, and they help us out a ton. So thanks to everyone who has already done that. Real quick, I want to remind everybody about the Brew Club, which is a free club to join and offers members all sorts of cool opportunities, one of which is having your experiment published on brewlosophy.com. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, member Todd DeLong had his experiment on pressurized lager fermentation published on the site. Super interesting stuff. Make sure you go check that out. Also, members of the Brew Club who tag photos of their brew day on social media with hashtag brewabeer, that's BRU a beer, or hashtag Brewlosophy will be entered into a drawing to have their photo featured in the Hop Beat, our regular newsletter, and they're going to receive some nifty Brewlosophy stickers as well. Learn more about becoming a member at thebrewclub.com. That's thebruclub.com, and make sure to subscribe to the Hop Beat using the form in the sidebar at brewlosophy.com. We send out occasional mailers. We're not going to share your email with anybody. Promise you about that. If you like what we're doing here, even just a little bit, and you want to help us to continue doing it, head over to brewlosophy.com/support and use the links you find there when doing all of your online shopping. You won't feel a thing, and we get a little kickback that helps to keep us doing what we're doing. We also offer rewards for your support. You can head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy to learn how you can receive unique discounts at yakimovalleyhops.com, a chance to win a $50 Love to Brew gift certificate, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a special guest, all for pledging as little as $1 a month. We've got Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo and Dr. Charlie Bamforth from the UC Davis Brewing Program coming on to answer questions. Head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy now to learn more about the rewards you can get for helping us to bring you this show. All right, Malcolm, only a few more days till we're going to be up in Yakima, Washington for Hop Harvest, and I'm getting more excited by the day. I'm pretty sure you're pretty stoked to head over to Hop Harvest for the first time ever.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the party aspect is awesome, and I love hanging out with those guys, but I'm a nerd. I want to go in those hop fields, man. You know, as much as I love beer and all things about it, I've been to a few local small hop fields. I've never been to a large hop field, and I want to do the stereotypical like rub some cones and smell my hands type stuff. I mean, I'm really looking forward to it.
You will not be able to avoid it. I'm telling you, you are in for a treat, man. Where we go, all of the little outlying towns, Moxie, and all these little towns outside of Yakima are just full of hops right now. And you'll be rubbing a ton of cones. I promise you that. We're going to be hanging out at various farms, hanging out with a bunch of different people. We're also going to be doing the Fresh Hop Party hosted by Yakima Valley Hops on the night of Friday, September 28th. Tons of fresh hop beers, 4 bands, and a bunch of cool people. It's going to be a night to remember. Only $15 if you get your tickets now. They are available. And $25 at the door. So not too bad. Then the following evening, Saturday, September 29th, we're going to be headed to the Fresh Hop Ale Festival, one of the top 10 beer festivals in the world, I hear. Tickets are available again for both of these events online. Just Google them. And if you're there, let us know. We'd love to hook up. We're also going to be collaborating with Wandering Hop. Now, we just settled on what we're going to be doing, and I'm pretty stoked for this. Wandering Hop is a relatively new brewery in Yakima. Brian and I had the opportunity to hang out with them at their soft opening last year. Nathan from Wandering Hop contacted me a few months ago to say that he'd like to do some sort of a collaboration. And what we settled on was, I feel like it's only appropriate given what we're going to Yakima for. We're going to be doing a beer for the Hop Chronicles, one of our projects where we have tasters evaluate a single hop beer and give us some data on that. So I'm not going to reveal what the hop is, but if you're around Yakima on Saturday, September 28th, between about 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock p.m., head over to Wandering Hop Brewery and give us your data. We would love that. And pretty sure it's going to be a pretty good beer. I already know the hop we're using, and I'm really excited to try this one. So it's going to be a good time. Finally, in March, Denny, Con, and I are going to be leading a couple seminars on experimentation in brewing for the Brew Your Own Boot Camp in Asheville, North Carolina. Tickets go fast for this one, so make sure you secure yours as soon as possible if you plan to attend. Okay, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in triclover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard to find items for both the home and craft brewing markets, including high quality stainless fittings at competitive prices and super fast shipping. If you're into electric brewing, got to check out the BCS 482 control system, which provides everything needed to fully automate your brewery. Learn more at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right, Malcolm, this is for you, buddy. This comes from Rob Friesel from Essex Junction, Vermont. He had a comment in regards to something that you said in a recent episode. So he writes,
great.
I love the show, but something from the DMS off-flavor episode was kind of bugging me. Around 24 minutes or so, Malcolm says something to the effect of, you know what the judge meant when they say that they picked up DMS and put it down on the score sheet. I've been on both sides of this as a judge and as a competitor, and I don't know that it's always so clear cut. As I was listening to that part of the episode, I was having flashbacks to one of the episodes about astringency, an off-flavor that plagues a few of my score sheets, and I was thinking, sometimes someone is just stating a belief because that's the closest match they have. This isn't to say that no one can pick up DMS. On the contrary, I believe I'm pretty sensitive to it, he says, but rather that competitors should treat the judge's feedback with skepticism because after all, they're only human. And as judges, we need to be sometimes mindful of how to give the feedback because again, we are only human.
Well, I completely is probably a bit too strong. I agree in part with that. Brewers are overhuman. Well, I agree with that part. We are.
I can guarantee you that we are on that one. Yeah, that is known fact.
But the taking the comments with some skepticism, healthy skepticism, sure. So my core group of friends, which I've talked about before on the show, who all came through the brewing ranks of beginner brewer, and we all started studying together to become what we hope to be good judges through the input of some of our other friends in trash. So we used to say to other people we were training, our coaching, or what do you want to call it, was that if you get a note back from a judge and it says this has DMS or this is astringent, it may or may not be so. We don't know the quality of that judge other than rank. What I would suggest, what we used to suggest as a group was, after you enter that beer to 3 or 4 or 5 competitions, then maybe you have a better representation. You start regressing to the mean. As more and more comments come and pick out certain things, then it's probably true. And the other spikes may be true, but they may be a sensitivity, or it may just be a judge falling back onto a standard reply. I taste astringency. That comes up so often, you know?
If you enter a beer in 4 different competitions with 4 different judging pairs, and those 4 score sheets come back with the same noted off flavor, that to me is at least a good indicator that perhaps there is this problem or whatever it is with the beer.
Right.
Where I agree with Rob is that I feel like there's kind of this joke when I was in grad school, and I got to paraphrase it, but what I recall of it was you get your bachelor's degree, you think you're a genius and know everything. As you're working towards your master's degree, you start to realize maybe you don't know everything, and only when you get your PhD do you realize how little you actually know, right? I feel like a lot of judges, the good majority of judges out there, and I'm not dissing judging. My goodness, I'm a judge. I'm a certified BJCP judge. I don't do it very often, but I feel like that kind of overlays on the judging thing too. You got a whole bunch of people who are being asked to judge who may not even be recognized or certified. And those people tend to have the most pride in their palates and think that they're the most correct. And this is not a blanket statement. I'm just kind of being general here. As people get more and more advanced, it seems that their palates become a tad more humble. They're able to recognize maybe this isn't it. And you can see that. There's a lot of really advanced judges score sheets that I've seen where they don't say it tastes like DMS. They might note, I get a slight corn-like character, in the finish of this beer, something like that, which is a little bit less certain.
Well, going back to his comment though, what I mean is because the larger majority of judges are beginners, are not even recognized yet, are certified.
Yeah.
If someone says DMS, that's almost code for this tastes of corn in some way or cabbage in some way. Now that may or may not be good. It may not be accurate, but that's their like code word, shorthand for corn eats something. And now it's up to the brewer to determine what that could be, unfortunately, because the brewer, the judge can only say, I detect this, and it's reminiscent of something I've been trained to say. And then the brewer can go back and be like, how can that be? And then he or she, the brewer, corrects it. Now, if it's only one score sheet, sure, you can say, well, it's not there. Go pound sand. But if it comes up on 3 or 4, and then some people from your brew club, then there's probably something to it.
Yeah. Well, and we have to finish this here because we could spend a whole episode on this. And Malcolm, write that down. Let's get this planned. But my argument is, you get this person who says DMS. You're probably not the only score sheet they said that on. And I think, and man, I sound like a jerk when I talk about this stuff, but I feel like people like to call that stuff out. And like I said in that episode that Rob's referring to, I think people misperceive malt character as DMS, or they misperceive other characteristics as diacetyl or astringency. I don't think that's terribly uncommon. I'm more wont at this point in my home brewing experience to think that if one person notes something that they're, they could potentially, I don't know, be wrong. But again, Rob, I appreciate you writing in. I couldn't agree with you more on what you said. We are only human. Judging, in my opinion, and competing as well, are there for fun. It's not there for anything else but to have a great time. And
it is fun.
Exactly. And if that's what you dig, that's why I don't mind talking about it the way that I do. It's I don't have like this, religious perspective of competing and judging. It's fine. There's, it doesn't have to have dogma.
It's fun, and it's a catalyst to learn. So you can use that to motivate yourself to be a better brewer and to learn, to educate yourself on these things. And that becomes the, we used to jokingly say the go maker. That's the go maker for knowledge.
There you go.
Because I judge, I want to know these things, and because I judge, I become a better brewer. And then I get feedback, so you delve in, and the cycle repeats. There
you go. And, better by whose standards. But we'll leave it at that. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or you can leave us a message by calling 951-444-0320. All right, well, seeing that this show is all about Irish Stout, I thought it only fitting that we spend some time chatting about a Munich Helles that homebrewer Chris Wilburn sent me a couple bottles of. Very Brewlosophy-centric beer this guy made, using our Helles kit from Love to Brew and fermenting it with our Brewlosophy blend yeast from Bootleg Biology.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. It looks good.
Of course, it looks good.
Not much smell.
Maybe that means it's going to be good.
Most likely. Nice and clean.
We don't like dirty beers.
No one likes a dirty beer.
Show your learnedness before I even
It's
taste
probably some lager. Tell me what you think.
it. Oh, it's crisp and clean and cool. It's a Coors Light, Middle Light, Bud Light.
It is,
I
yeah.
like it. Yep, it's light. Well, we do this all the time. If it tastes like Coors Middle Bud, it's probably Pilsner, maybe.
It might be a Miller Lite first, we know.
Now, well, I mean, if you just say Pilsner, it encompases all that.
It's very good beer. I would put this on tap at my house.
It's good. I don't know what to
See?
say.
I'm telling you.
Let's just call it a Pilsner. Final answer.
Pilsner.
A delicious Pilsner, which I give 8 jerseys.
It's good. Well, I got to go more than 8. We'll go 10.
That's a total of 16.7 Jersey Tims. I like it, dude.
So this beer comes from Chris. He says, so this is the Love to Brew Brulosophy Munich Helles recipe with the bootleg biology Brulosophy yeast. He says the only variation from the recipe was that I didn't boil for 90 minutes. He says this was my first attempt at a Helles and I think it turned out good, but it had a bit of a maltier finish than I expected.
It was hella good.
You got me feeling hell is good, so I'm going to keep on drinking.
Well, it's no surprise to me that Jersey and Tim liked this pale lager, crisp, drinkable, crushable. I think Tim said he'd sit by the pool and drink this all day, put it on tap at his house. I got to be honest, man, this beer was absolutely delicious. And I'm not just saying that. I know I'm biased. I'm not just saying that because it's a recipe that I designed with a yeast that I helped, or yeast blend that I helped put together. The beer was super clean, really good. I'm not entirely certain what Chris's brewing process was on this. I don't know if he fermented it warm or fermented it cool. With that particular yeast blend, he could go either direction. Either way, I know that Helles recipe kit is great. I've actually brewed the Love to Brew kit multiple times. I still brew that inspired versions of that beer from time to time. So thanks a lot, Chris. Malcolm, what do you think, man?
I think their reviews are hilarious. I haven't had that. I haven't had that beer, of course. So, yeah, I mean, Helles is delicious. It's probably one of my favorite beer styles.
Yeah,
so.
we're going to have to do a straight Munich Helles short and shoddy to talk about on this show as well, because that's going to be one that's going to ruffle some feathers, right? Because you expect it to be cold fermented and treat it all, with white gloves, but we're not going to do that when we do short and shoddy. So anyways, again, Chris, thanks for sending that in. If you have a beer or any other alcoholic beverage you'd like reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. We'll be right back. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Well, it's not terribly difficult to determine what region of the world Irish Stout stems from, but there are few styles with such a rich history, and I think it's been pretty influential, too.
Yeah, well, other than modern history, which, Pilsners dominate, obviously, is by volume, stouts, and especially porters, were the dominant beer for almost 200 years. Porters was probably the first industrial mass-produced beer in brewing history. So it had 200 years of dominance. It was massively exported. It shaped the beer industry in its surrounding countries as well.
Yeah, it's
in
crazy.
fact, there's brewing logs in Germany of brewing a porter. There's porters took over Scottish and Irish brewing. It was the thing. It was the IPA of its age. Absolutely. In fact, IPA in modern craft brewing standards is a blip compared to how popular porter was and for how long.
Yeah.
And I know I'm talking about porter, but as we alluded to in the beginning, porter and stout are linked. So you cannot talk about stout without talking about porter.
So let's get that out of the way, because porter, and we don't need to get into the history of porter necessarily, but that, my understanding, and maybe this is hogwash, but my understanding is that that name actually came from the fact that it was a beer brewed for porters, basically people who were cleaning ships and stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of the early writing, it's one of those like proof through consensus type things. A lot of writing, and the best place to look all this stuff up, obviously is source material, but go to Ron Pattinson's blog, Shut Up About Barclay Perkins.
Absolutely.
Our Zythophile, which is Martin Cornell. Okay. There's so much history, it'd be impossible to do a 1 hour show on it.
Right.
You have to do segments of 50 years or 100 years. Anyways, so yes, it does seem that porter took its name from those who the drink was popular with. So it was a beer drank by all people. That's why it was so popular. They weren't just exporting it to porters.
Right.
It was locally drank by porters, and it seemed that that's where they took the name from.
Yeah.
It may have been a brown ale before that, but as tastes and ingredients and processes shaped it, the beer that was porter was enjoyed by porters, those who worked on the docks and shipping.
And we're talking about, we're talking about regionally. This was greater United Kingdom for the most part, right?
Well, it was all over London for sure.
Yeah.
And then United Kingdom, and then as the beer became popular, it more or less, if you want to say infected, but it definitely influenced the brewers up in, say, Edinburgh in Scotland, and then the Irish brewers. They started brewing porters. So then porters, and then so the porter was the most popular, of course, through this time. But then there was an adjective to describe porter, and that was stout. So, but stout wasn't just porter. Stout could also be a pale ale. Stout was just an adjective. It just meant bigger, stronger, bolder. Right.
Which is sort of ironic, seeing as Irish stout, or I should say stout of most kinds, actually is no longer what I think a lot of people would deem very strong. We'll get into modern descriptions later. But so stout was this word, this adjective used just to describe a certain type of beer characteristic, not necessarily just dark porter.
Right. Because stout just literally meant higher gravity. I mean, that's just it.
Bigger.
When people ask, the question comes up every month, maybe more often in one of the home brewing forums, our Facebook pages, etc. Hey, what's the difference between porter and stout? And everyone goes, here we go again.
Here we go again.
I always reply with the name. Now it's the name. Way back it was the name, because it was the name in gravity. So it was the name first, the gravity first. Stout meant higher gravity, and then as the gravities converged, it became naming. Because if you go back into the 1800 brewing logs, or 19th century, for a long time, the grain bills were the exact same.
Yeah.
I mean, the exact same. Sometimes at the beginning, they would use more water for the porter to make it less, not as high gravity.
Right.
But they were the same.
Yeah.
So, brown malt, amber malt, sometimes mild malt, a little bit of dark malt, but not black patent until 1817. Daniel Wheeler invented the roasting wheel. So 1817, I'm pretty sure that's right. But anyways, so pretty much just a description of gravity.
Yeah.
And then through economic pressures and it's always taxation, right? There's so many vectors on beer. One of them is always location, availability of ingredients, process, which is often defined by, the technology of the area.
Right.
But the strongest vector on beer has always been taxes and whatever influences that, be it war, economic famine, whatever.
Yeah.
So as taxes created a downward vector on beer gravity, the stouts in some regions became less high of a ABV, so lower original gravity.
And at some point during that time frame, stout became the label for a specific style of beer as opposed to just a descriptor, a general beer description.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just naming convention, really, because it became a stout porter, and then it just kind of dropped the porter in Ireland. It just became what they were associated with, and I don't really understand like the cliff. You can look at the logs. The brewers were calling it stout and porter. Up until 1900s. So it's kind of weird. At some point, Guinness, because it was very influential, stopped calling their stout porter a porter, but they continued to brew a porter though. It's
so weird.
They continued to brew a porter until the 70s.
Yeah. Well, let's, like you said, we could go on about what this type of beer is called, but the focus of this show is specifically Irish Stout. Now there are various different types of stout. We're going to get to those later. But let's focus. You mentioned Guinness, and I don't think there is a brand out there more associated with the style of Irish Stout than Guinness.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think of, there's probably two beers that mark style this strongly. Obviously Guinness with the dry Irish Stout, our Irish Stout, and then California Common or Anchor Steam. Those two beers are like almost defined by two brands.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody who's brewing a version of that style is trying essentially to match the original. Yeah,
and that's a shame because there's variance in Irish Stout. And there was for a very long time. They had foreign extra. They had at the beginning they had just their single stout. They had double stout. They had double brown stout. So porters and stouts weren't always black.
Yeah.
So there was multiples, and it looked like there was probably about the main three or so, various strengths stouts. But what dominates the market now is the Irish Stout, Guinness, and to a lesser degree, the other two, which would be Murphy's Stout and Beamish.
Yeah.
O'Hara's is also really nice too, so that's worth seeking out if you haven't had that one.
So Irish Stout in general, it's known for some very specific things. One of which we mentioned already, which is being relatively low in alcohol. Guinness nails that, but I think, obviously the most quintessential thing is that it's roasted malts, which again, there's a lot of history behind that as well. You mentioned the roasting wheel being invented around 1817 or so, but there are reasons that Guinness, at least purportedly, began making this specific style of beer outside of the fact that people just wanted to drink it.
Well, yeah, the goofy thing about the roasted barley, for example, is that it's not that long of a history at all.
Yeah.
It's maybe 1930s, so 70, 80 years max, So somewhere around 1929, 1931, according to Martin's logs, and I think Ron Pattinson backs this up, there was no mention of roasted barley in any of the brew logs or any of their pamphlets if you took a tour until somewhere around 1930.
Yeah, so interesting.
It was probably black patent, up until then. So, one of the experiments we did when I think it was you, swapped out black patent for roasted barley.
Yep.
Well, there's logs of stouts being brewed where it was like used interchangeably.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
and in that experiment, that people couldn't tell a difference between the two beers. And despite belief that there are a difference between those two malts, but my understanding, what I was told, and I believe you might have some information to counter this, though, was that one of the main reasons, kind of the evolution of this style, really, that this high amount of roasted grain was being used was to counter the really hard water that Guinness had to brew with.
Yeah, absolute rubbish. Because
that's why I brought it up, man.
Yeah, so our friend and certainly a guy who has inspired me with water, Martin Brewingard, he had a great interview, and he goes on about the water coming off the Wicklow Mountains, which was actually quite soft because the Wicklow Mountains aren't a very porous, substrate, so they kind of just flow right into the River Liffey. So the water where they were tapping off of, and this is all per him, and I have no reason to discount it, but it wasn't super hard, wasn't super carbonate. And if you do a tour now at St. James, and if you have a group of people who will tolerate someone like myself asking nerdy questions, and if you get the attention of one of the brewers, because they can be on certain special tours. I think our buddy over at Five Blades, Derek, he did a bloggers tour, and they pretty much said, hey, they're steeping their dark grains separately and adding it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
Because as we know, if you had a fairly soft water and even just 5% of patent malt are up to 10% or thereabouts of roasted barley, which is what most Irish stout recipes will have. They'll have like 70% pale, 20% flaked barley, and then 10% plus or minus a few percent either way of roasted barley. But if you had all that roasted barley in soft water, your pH is going to be way down.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's the thing, for people who haven't geeked out on water chemistry yet, roasted malts are higher, will bring your pH down because they're higher acidity, or roasted grains in general are higher acidity. And that's what we're referring to now. Is the idea was that Guinness, the water that Guinness was using was so high in bicarbonate, so hard basically, that it required either a ton of acid for it to drop down into that pH range that we consider to be proper for brewing beer. So they ended up using, and again, we're hearing from Malcolm that this is all rubbish, but that they used a high degree of that roasted malt to kind of help compensate for that high pH.
Well, yeah, think of right now, Guinness is St. James is a massive brewery. They probably use treated water, probably RO.
That's my guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Or water from the river Liffey that they treat, in some way, strip minerals out and add to get the profile they want, because they're brewing it in more than one location.
Yeah.
So it's probably softer water. They steep their dark grains separately, because now the water has no buffering capacity, because if they were to put those dark malts in there, it would really screw up their pH. So they steep the black malt, the dark malt separately, and they bring them over to adjust flavor and color.
Right. So we don't know for sure. I mean, it sounds like you're saying this actually is completely untrue about the whole water thing. But what we do know is that Irish Stout is very high in roasted barley or roasted grains in general.
Yeah, but a nice soft roast character, right? I mean, it's not
sharp exactly.
Some people think it is, but I don't think it is. I think it's a soft roast.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So, well, let's get into, that's kind of the historical stuff, and you can't discuss this style without discussing Guinness. That's why I wanted to spend some time on that. But let's start talking about the modern descriptions. And, well, what I think would be interesting is somebody who knows the BJCP as well as you do. It seems like there have been a couple of it's over the years, they've kind of some iterations of this style as it develops into its kind of own thing for modern brewers.
Well, yeah. So even just as recently as 2015, they changed the name from dry Irish Stout to Irish Stout,
Right.
And they got rid of like robust porter. So, before you had a bunch of sources and a bunch of authors writing different portions of the BJCP guidelines, and it's still like that.
Yeah.
But they're reaching out to people who are not, before they were using various sources of, this book and that book, and then some of their own experience, and now they have access to people who I've mentioned previously, doing research and coming back with actual logs and advertisements, and this is a work in progress.
Totally.
And because the BJCP wasn't meant to be like the stamp on beer, it was meant to chronicle what is going on now.
Yeah.
As we've said before in previous episodes, it's descriptive, not prescriptive.
Right.
So they chronicle what is out there under a certain style. So, hey, the crowd accepts this as an Irish stout. Everyone calls it dry Irish stout. So they categorize it so people can compete under those guidelines.
Sure. Well, and I don't think Gordon Strong would disagree with us that the BJCP guidelines are more of a living document, right? It's this thing is
Absolutely.
ever changing. Yeah. So
and it'll be better now that as they move towards digital, they can update it
whenever they want. Yeah.
More easily. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah.
So now they have Irish stout there, and if you were to sit down and drink a Beamish versus a Guinness versus a Harpoon Boston versus a Murphy's, they're obviously very much alike, but they're different as well. So it's called Irish Stout, not dry Irish Stout. Now, if you have a Murphy's, it's much creamier, it's much sweeter, it's delicious. Whereas, the typical Guinness is very much, people say watery, which is kind of a unfortunate description, but it's a thinner beer for sure.
It is, yeah. And I think that's why, one of again, we'd be remiss not to point out the fact that a lot of Irish stouts, particularly Guinness, is known for this, is being served on nitro. And my understanding is that part of that was to give it kind of the impression of body. And either way, it's delicious. Drink it how you like. Not necessary for the style, but yeah, they, this, I like that they dropped the dry because that feels almost more subjective to me. Dryness is more of an impression. And I don't get that from a Murphy's or
dryness can be an impression, sure, but dryness is also a degree of attenuation.
It absolutely is. I get that.
It's measurable by being dry, meaning not a lot of residual sugars,
right?
But it's also a perceptible thing. So
there's
going to be subjectivity there. But another neat thing about the nitrogen is, yes, it definitely does lead to smoothing out the potential harshness of roast.
Sure,
but really, some people believe that it was really meant to emulate the serving method of the casks.
That's
right. They would use a flatter beer as the main beer, and then they would have a younger, liver beer, and they would pour it kind of aggressively with the tap only partially open.
Yeah.
To kind of splash into the beer and create that nice head.
So the way like all of my guests who've never used a faucet pour their beer in my house. Yeah.
So you had the body of the beer was kind of smooth and creamy because it had almost no carbonation left.
Yeah.
And then the top of the beer was lively and gave that nice foam. And it gave a little bit of spritziness to the beer. So when the nitrogen draft system came about, it was meant to emulate that, supposedly. I can't say that's definitive, but it's kind of a neat story.
Well, let's go down some of the typical characteristics of a beer. Obviously, the appearance. BJCP uses the term jet black to very deep brown with garnet highlights. That's kind of like you hold it up to the light and you see a nice ruby red kind of on the corner, but it's still opaque. You're still not able to see through it. Beautiful, in my opinion, one of the more beautiful types of beers, just given how incredibly pitch black it can be.
I love it. And, a lot of people will say all beer is red. And then as it gets thicker in concentration, or if you change the roast components, it goes more towards dark red until it becomes opaque and black looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you take the glass and tilt it to the light, you'll see that the edges are ruby red. It's it's beautiful.
Beautiful.
And I love the stark contrast of the dark, apparently black beer with that tan crema foam. With that, it's so contrasting. It's so beautiful. Every time I look at one, I want one. It's hard for me. Like I can go up to like a bar, like a standard like Pub X, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna get a local IPA, and someone goes, I'll have a Guinness and I look at it getting poured. I'm like, nah, that's not me. That's what I'm getting.
I'm gonna come in. I got something that drives me nuts, and this is I don't see it so much these days, but it used to be very common. Malcolm, I know you're gonna know what I'm talking about. When it came to beer clarification, so whether that meant using kettle finings or fining with gelatin or whatever it is, the argument that it's so dark it doesn't matter if it's clear or not, I so disagree with that. Partially because I feel like the stuff that remains in suspension does have an impact on other areas such as flavor and mouthfeel even. But I want that beer, despite how dark it is, to have those nice crystal clear, ruby red highlights when I hold it up to the light. That's just something I really enjoy. So
well, it's going to impact the foam because you have nucleation points.
Right.
If you have anything in there, it's going to affect the shelf stability because those things are active sites for oxidation and deterioration of flavor.
Yeah.
But just take a beer like a Guinness, and this is a sin, but if you get like an ultra fine flour, put it in there and whisk it in there with like a coffee foamer or even just a whisk, whatever, it changes the color. It'll change the hue.
Yeah. For sure.
And we're talking like just like a pinch and a sprinkle of flour.
Yeah.
Because that flour is going to pick up light and reflect, and it's going to change the character of the beer. So
absolutely,
that's absolute rubbish.
Yeah,
it's absolute rubbish.
So much rubbish about this style. Obviously, I think the most common descriptor in terms of aroma is coffee. Though it seems like a good Irish stout can kind of run. There's a good spectrum of descriptors that people use, ranging from I think that the most roasty would be coffee, but you got dark chocolate.
Baker's cocoa.
Baker's cocoa is another one, kind of a bitter chocolate type of thing. You also might be able to pick up some earthy notes from the English hops that typically are used in this style. Those aromatic characteristics seem to kind of carry through in the flavor. That roasted grain flavor, in my opinion, is very coffee-like, and I tend to prefer. I love dark coffee. I drink my coffee dark 99% of the time. I like that flavor, but when it's the flavor that I get from my favorite types of Irish stouts tend to have a little bit of a balance of sweetness there that can come from, we'll talk about ingredients in a bit, but maybe it can come from a crystal malt or something like that, just to kind of balance out that kind of coffee thing. What do you think, Malcolm?
Yeah, so the prototype, if you want to do a Guinness clone, the Guinness yeast is somewhat fruity. You get kind of like this dark plum and fig thing going on.
Right.
So that's the balance to the bitterness. But if you go up to cork in those areas, you get more character malts. So you get like I'm not sure what the exact ingredients are, but I believe one or two of them use wheat. I don't have it memorized if it was O'Hare's or Beamish, but I think one of those advertises they use wheat. Uh-huh. And then if you have O'Hare's, there's definitely some. It has a chocolate and caramel and toffee note to it.
Yeah,
and they also prominently advertise the use of Fuggles. So O'Hare's is one of the few that has like a little bit of a hop aroma.
Yeah.
Whereas as most of these, it's going to be bittering hops. Done. There's no real hop aroma. It's all about the roast.
Yeah.
But especially in the craft realm, there's room for playing.
Oh, for sure, especially in homebrewing. I mean, I've brewed so many different iterations of dry stout, and I'm telling you, you can make these small little tweaks that really do impact the overall character of the beer. I think it's great. One of the more important aspects of a good Irish stout, in my opinion, as we were talking about with Guinness kind of being a little bit thin, is the mouthfeel. In my opinion, you want that lower ABV to be paired with the impression of at least some, make a moderate body. Yeah, well,
it's kind of like it's a paradox because it has the creaminess from the nitro, from the light little bubbles dancing on your tongue, whatever. But then if you let it sit in your mouth and you kind of give it a little swish or whatever and do like the wine thing, you can feel that it's actually quite thin.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that dichotomy there. It's at once it's prickly and smooth without being harsh, and then if you kind of let it linger a second, and as you drink it and you get past that foam and you start drinking it towards the bottom third of the glass, it's definitely thinner. And carbonation is a weird thing because once it goes too high, it becomes prickly, but a little bit of carbonation lends to smoothness.
Right.
And then you get into that middle zone. Then when you get down below it again, like in this 1.2 volume British and Irish beer realm, it starts to become smooth again.
Yeah.
You know, and creamy. And then if it gets totally flat, now it's like thick. You
Yeah.
know, so it's all about the Goldilocks syndrome, being in that right space. You know, but yeah, these are like eminently drinkable.
Yeah.
So because there's nitrogen, and most of the nitrogen comes out of solution, there's very little carbonation, so they're not filling. So you drink pints and pints of these.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention, this is one of those styles that I think, is best served at quote unquote cellar temperatures, somewhere around 12 degrees Celsius, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. What I'll usually do, because I have one keezer that I keep at, 38 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever, is when I have one of these on tap, I'll pour a full big no-nick pint of it, and let it sit out on my counter for 10 minutes or so before I really start going to town on it.
I'd like to get an internet poll if it's no-nick or non-nick.
So I used to call it non-nick, and then I was told by an English person that it's no-nick because the bulb meant that they didn't have to nick the glass.
Absolutely, that's the reason.
Okay.
But I hear both, and I just don't know. It's like potato,
Call it what you want. Who cares? It's
Yeah.
just a glass, right? Just a couple of
Whoa,
stats.
you're hurting my heart.
All right, let's talk about some stats here. Typical according to the BJCP, you got an OG of about 1036 to 1044, with the beer finishing around 1007 to 1011 for an ABV of between 4 and 4.5% alcohol. IBUs tend to be between 25, and they can get up pretty high. You can have a pretty bitter version of this, up to 45 IBU, and the SRM, dark basically, but 25 to 40 is what the BJCP has listed. In terms of ingredients, you're looking at primarily a pale malt, and I know that Golden Promise is commonly used in these, or Maris Otter's another one that's commonly used to kind of impart a toasty character to the beer. But of course, it's not a Irish stout without a bunch of roasted barley or black patent. So you need a good chunk of that. I think for a 5-gallon batch, I see about 1 pound being fairly typical. So 1 pound of roasted barley or black patent, or a blend of the two, maybe some chocolate malt in there. And then another ingredient that I see very commonly used in Irish stout is flaked barley.
Yeah. And I don't really know when that came about. I just really don't. I think it was used to dry it out, instead of flaked maize, which was popular in England. And throughout various times of history, sugar was used in various amounts.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine that the flaked barley is there to help thin it out.
And which is interesting because I remember, way back in the day when I was researching my first Irish stout, a decade ago, the argument was that you had to have the flaked barley in order to keep some body, that it was going to impart kind of a creamy mouthfeel to the beer. So
yeah, I don't know. I tried to find when that came up. I'm sure if I went through Ron Pattinson's blog, I could probably find a spot on which it first showed up.
Yeah.
Maybe it has sufficient protein to create some body, or maybe it's a foam stabilizer, but so is dark roasted malt. Those have foam positive components to them too.
Yeah.
I'm at a loss. I just don't know what the flake barley is there, other than tradition. And if it is tradition, it's somewhere after 1900.
Yeah.
I looked all through the 1800s and it's not there. Unless they're labeling it something that I'm not aware of.
Right. Well, you see it in a lot of recipes that you can find online. Sure. I tend to use it in mine as well. For that purpose, because tradition perhaps. And then for hops, you're typically looking at your hops grown over there in the United Kingdom. You got Fuggles, EKG, perhaps something else, tending towards the more earthy characteristics. But again, the hop character isn't necessarily the strongest component of this style of beer. So whatever you need to use to get to the IBU that you're looking for. And then as far as yeast goes, I think the Guinness strain has been isolated by many labs out there. Imperial Yeast calls it darkness. And it's a great yeast to use for more than just this style, in my opinion. But that's, again, it's a slightly more ester profile. I think, Malcolm, you said you get kind of a fruity thing from that strain as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
to me, it's like the dark dried fruits, figs, plums, currants.
Right. One of the more important aspects that a lot of people do focus on, as we were talking about earlier, is water chemistry, tending toward a higher carbonate. So you can use baking soda for that. Some people are using like slaked lime, right?
So if you have to counteract, if you're going to mash with it and you have softer water, you can use lime, or you can use pickling lime.
Pickling lime, right.
Yeah, which is usually available in grocery stores or online if you look up pickling lime in the canning section.
Yeah, right. Oh, it's super cheap. I bought a bag of it like 2 years ago, and I think I've used maybe 10 grams. But then the what you're looking at in terms of water chemistry, higher chloride ratio to sulfate to really encourage that malt character to stand out front. I think typically with the water that I have at my house, if I'm going to measure out my minerals, I'm going for something like 100 ppm chloride to about 50 ppm sulfate. That seems to work fine for me. And then the brewing process is pretty typical for what you would do, for any other ale that you're making. Some people like to hold off on adding their roasted grain until the end. They cap their mash. They'll add that roasted grain at the end of the mash. Some people will make a kind of a cold steeped version of just the roasted grains. They cold steep that in water and then add that into the wort post mash. So you're not worrying about the water chemistry stuff. Mash is typically 60 minutes. You rack it over to your kettle, you boil it for 60 minutes, you chill it as usual, and then you're going to ferment it as you would a normal ale. I like to go, when I'm using that darkness yeast, I like to go somewhere around 66 degrees Fahrenheit, which I believe is about 19 degrees Celsius.
Yeah. And the important thing to me is that experiment with the grain bill. I'm going to give you a hard time about, I think, Munich in your stupid Irish Stout, but I mean, for real though, experiment. Try different types of caramels. Try different type. There's the standard, which we mentioned. Pale, roasted, and flaked. But by all means, fool around with it a little bit. It may not perform as well in a competition, but it may be delicious.
Well, and maybe it'll perform better. I actually got the idea to use Munich in Irish Stout, which I use it in almost every Irish Stout now from Randy Mosher.
Satan?
I know. No, from Randy Mosher. He actually suggested one time, hey, you're making a dark beer. You want it to have more malt character. Replace 50% of your pale ale malt or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Experiment. I agree with that. As far as when fermentation is complete, like I mentioned earlier, I like my everything, regardless of color, to be nice and clear with no particulate in it, unless it's supposed to be there, I guess. But so I'll typically find with gelatin, do something like that, cold crash it. And then I carbonate it decently well. And there's a reason I do that. This is a very subjective thing. I'll carbonate it up to probably about 2.5 volumes. And people will say that you should carbonate Irish Stout maybe to 2 volumes or so, that it's not supposed to be have too much gas in it. But what I like to do is this little trick. I don't have a nitrogen setup on my Keyser. So there's this little trick that I've learned where if you take a syringe that you would use to like give a kid medicine, you can get these things for free at your local pharmacy. You fill it with about 3 milliliters of beer from the glass, and then you pull it out and fill that rest of the syringe with air. Poke it back down into your beer and just shoot it down really quick. It creates this you get your typical cascade. You get a nice creamy head on the top, and it takes out some of that gas to make it taste, or at least create that experience of more of a typical nitro poured type of Guinness beer.
Yeah, I do something similar, and I've fooled around with that. You're almost making a cask widget, actually.
Yeah.
So, but I do it low. So I'll carbonate my Irish Stouts like in the 2s, like I would an English beer.
Yeah.
High 1s, 1.8 to 2.2. And then once you do that gas thing, because the widget actually works by either taking beer with gas or just gas, depending on what you read, into that little ball. And then when you release the pressure, it comes out rapidly, and that causes a disturbance, in the force.
Yeah.
And it knocks out all the CO2 and nitrogen, so it causes that cascade effect. So it's like that Venturi effect as the air rushes past that little tiny orifice, it creates a massive pressure drop.
Yeah.
And boom. So if you do that with a 1.8 to 2.2 carbonated beer, you still get that cascading effect. It still knocks out some of the gas. It will create a nice head, but now you'll be remaining with this like 1 point. I mean, I don't know exactly, but low ones, mid ones beer.
Very,
and to me, it's more representative of a cask beer.
Yeah, very
but
not
fizzy. But do what you like.
Yeah,
however it works.
Well, brewing a decent Irish Stout obviously isn't very difficult. Again, the process is similar to how you'd brew any other beer. But what about when you cut a ton of corners? That's exactly what I did. Results when we return. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. So as a lover of Irish Stout, and I'm somebody who brews this style of beer a couple of times a year, I wanted to have one ready for around St. Patrick's Day. I think a lot of people like to have this style on tap around them, but I didn't feel like brewing it using all of the traditional methods. I was curious what would happen if I used my short and shoddy method, which basically is cutting every possible corner I can to turn this beer around as quickly as possible. When we do these short and shoddies, we'd like to consider every aspect of the brew day. And one of them is preparing for the brew day. You know, my typical brew preparation consists of going out the night before, measuring out my malt, milling it all, and then weighing out all of my minerals based on the profile that I'm trying to hit, all of this stuff and getting everything ready. Well, for this batch, my preparation consisted of brewing an American IPA. This was an interesting one. I was actually in the middle of brewing a batch of IPA when I thought to do a party guile, something I'd never done before. Basically reusing the spent grains from this IPA batch for a lower OG style, and I determined a stout would work out really well. Of course, I had to doctor things up a bit, so I took that IPA grist and added to it, post-mash, some roasted barley and some flaked oats. I didn't use flaked barley because I didn't have any on hand, but I did have some oatmeal, so I just threw that in instead. Malcolm, have you ever done a party guile like this?
Yeah. I used to do them a lot for British beers. I would take a single wort, and I would run off portions of it. So I did it two ways, either traditionally by taking multiple runnings of the worts from one mash, which I didn't prefer. But what I would normally do is take a large portion of the wort, and then so I'd make like a 15-gallon batch or even a 10-gallon batch, and divert a portion of that wort off to the side, finish brewing that one while I started I just let that one sit, and I would take a bag of character malts and steep it in it.
Yeah.
And then, so I basically flavor that one. So I did it mostly with British bitters.
So that was the idea for this Irish Stout as well. So basically what happened was I'm brewing this IPA, and while it's mashing, I collect the full volume of water. This was brew in a bag. So I collect the full volume of water in my second kettle. I did not filter the water. I ran it through an RV hose, which just stays outside of my house, skipping my normal filtration process. And thankfully, where I live in Fresno, they don't use chloramines to treat the water. The water, it does have chlorine in it, but it's not very strong. So, I'm kind of hedging my bets here. Once the full volume of water was collected, I added a very precisely measured palmful of calcium chloride. I didn't adjust with acid. I didn't actually weigh out how much calcium chloride I was adding. I added no gypsum. So I have no idea what the actual final water profile was. Once that was added in, I threw in my hot rod heat stick into the water and let it start heating that water up while I was finishing the IPA batch. Thankfully, that heat stick works really well, and it got it up warm enough, at least for me to transfer, or for me to finish the brew. Now, what I wasn't going to do, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, all of the starches will have been, or most of the starches will have been converted in the initial mash, right? In the IPA mash. So I don't need to do a true mash rest. So what I did when the IPA was done is I took the bag out, let it drip into the kettle until I reached that pre-boil volume. And then I just moved the bag over to the warm water, which at that point had reached 148 degrees Fahrenheit. So not even sparge temperature, really. That's 64 degrees Celsius. Once it hit that water, I removed the heat stick so it wasn't getting any more heat. I stirred in those extra grains, the roasted barley and the flaked oats, stirred that up, had a glass of hard berry cider with my friends, took about 4 or 5 minutes, and then I proceeded with removing the grain bag. So basically that whole process was just to rinse any remnant sugar that was already converted from the majority of the grist from those grains into the new batch of water. I didn't know if I was gonna do real well with this, but I wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah, you added the flaked oats and you added the roasted barley. So roasted barley doesn't need converted, and the oats, I guess, should be exposed to enzymes. So if you had any enzymes available, then they would convert and break down any starches in the oats. Now
the question would be, though, is that the 4 or 5 minutes that I had those flaked oats with the other grains, is that long enough for the conversion? I mean, I'll be honest. The reason I added the flaked oats, part of it was because I usually use flaked barley, and in my mind, I'm using it to add that mouthfeel and some body. I was concerned that this beer was going to be really, really thin and watery. So the oats are flaked, so they may have already had some of the beta glucans, broken down, right,
into the starches during that process. I maybe, but the proof is in the pudding. So if the beer tasted okay, it's fine. But I think normally I would have mashed it. But we know from experimentation that just a few minutes is where you get a bulk of the conversion. So if you had enough enzymes in that other concoction, if you had you brought it over in a bag with pale malt in it. There's probably enzymes still in there.
Oh,
It's
I'm
gonna work
sure.
on it fairly
Yeah,
quickly.
I didn't do a mash out or anything, so it's not like we had denatured those enzymes. So that was kind of my hope, and I was really curious how that very, very short, call it a sparge, if you will, a sparge with extra grains, I guess. I was curious how it would turn out. As soon as I removed that bag, so again, these second spent grains, basically, they were in the water for 4 minutes with the roasted barley and with the flaked oats. As soon as that was done, I removed the bag, tossed in a single dose of Perle hops immediately after removing the bag, and as a kind of a first wort hop addition. And then I brought the wort to a boil and I let her rip for a full 20 minutes before chilling the wort with my King Cobra immersion chiller, which is super fast. At the time, I was able to get the wort down to 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. So, I mean, we're looking right now, we are literally, after chilling, that took about 6 minutes. We're at about 30 minutes for this entire batch, which is the quickest I've ever made a beer in my life, even using extract. So we're at about 30 minutes. The wort is transferred into a sanitized fermenter. At that point, I took a refractometer reading. Now, I was, I didn't know what to expect, but I kind of figured with the IPA grist that I'd get close to what the BJCP says is at least kind of the lower end of the OG range. 1024 OG.
Hey, yeah, it's a mild.
Yeah, it actually could have been a mild, but it was so dark. It would have been a dark mild. Yeah. So 12 points lower than the 1036 kind of lower end recommendation by the BJCP. I didn't care. I was a little bit concerned again about how this beer was going to finish out. 1024, I thought it would just be a watery mess. I'm not really sure what that meant about the total efficiency, since this was a Party Guile batch. I have to believe, given the Party Guile approach, that I was probably hovering around 50% efficiency. I'm not sure though. So as far as fermentation goes, we were going all out on this bad boy. I pitched a single can of Imperial A09 Pub Ale yeast directly into the 72 degree Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius wort. No starter, no chilling to fermentation temperatures. And I believe I was actually using one of my last cans of Imperial yeast, and I think it was like 2 or 3 months old. So again, we were going all out. I do love this strain, which is said to be sourced from Fuller's. And hey, speaking of Imperial yeast, if you haven't checked out what they have to offer yet, I highly recommend you do so ASAP. Providing brewers with the finest quality yeast on the market, Imperial yeast packs 200 billion cells into each pitch-right pouch. No more cans. Ensuring brewers a quick and healthy fermentation, they offer a wide variety of ale and lager strains, as well as some funkier stuff. I am super confident Imperial yeast has whatever it is that you need to turn your wort into delicious beer, and that you'll love it as much as we do. I honestly cannot recommend these people enough. Go check out everything Imperial yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com today. So while I did let the beer ferment in my fermentation chamber, I did not regulate the temperature with my controller at all. So I brewed this batch in the wintertime. In the wintertime here in Fresno, it can get down into the 50s outside, which means my garage stays about 65. So there was a little bit concerned I'd get a little too warm, but my guess is it kind of hung out around 68 degrees to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Those chest freezers are fairly well insulated, so any exothermic heat created from fermentation kind of sticks around in there. I didn't check the temperature. I just kind of let the thing go for 2 weeks. I noticed obvious signs of fermentation after just 6 hours after pitching the yeast, so that's something I've come to expect from Imperial yeast as well. And it was directly pitched again. So this is no starter. Just toss that yeast in there and let it do its thing.
Did you oxygenate?
I never do. Now I did rack the wort directly into the fermenter with some vigor, but that's something I do all the time as well. And it's more a function of the fact that my kettle is, way up high off the ground, and I keep the fermentation vessel on the ground. So,
hey, at this time when you were racking, was the wort fairly turbid? Because I was just wondering if the oats, because you didn't mash them for very long, I was wondering if they were going to be kind of like a milky.
No.
Wow.
So I expected that. The wort looked exactly like you would expect a typical dry stout wort to look. It was almost crystal clear at the time of filling the fermentation chamber. Yeah. No issues at that point other than that was on my mind, other than the fact that the OG was so low. Again, the beer was left to ferment alone. There was no change of temperature at all for 2 full weeks, at which point I took a hydrometer measurement that showed it reached 1007 FG. So, hey, we're kind of spot on with the lower range there for what the BJCP says. And given the 1024 OG meant that this Irish Stout clocked in at a a whopping 2.2% ABV. So basically water with a little bit of alcohol in it. As you might imagine, I mean, I did not expect much from this beer at this point. I figured it was, again, just going to be this like roasty, you know, when you have old coffee sitting out on the counter and you figure I'm going to give it a shot, you know, I want some caffeine, and you taste it and it just tastes like nasty water with a little bit of roast in it. That's kind of what I thought this beer was going to be like. So after those 2 weeks, I decided to skip my usual gelatin finding step on this batch, and I didn't cold crash it either. Again, I'm going against what I would usually do, that I think it makes things really simple. I would usually find this and treat it like I do all my other beers because I like them clear. I was just curious to see what would happen if I skipped all that stuff and went super shoddy. So I racked the warm beer into a sanitized keg. I placed it in my keezer and I hit it with 35 psi of CO2 for 22 hours for burst carbonation. I then reduced the gas and let the beer condition for another few days until the weekend came, at which point it was time to serve this sacrilegious stout to unsuspecting tasters. Now, Malcolm, before we get to the data, based on the brewing process and the beer stats, what might we expect from an Irish Stout of this sort?
Well, I think being so low in gravity, both starting and finishing, I thought it would be kind of insipid. And with the uncontrolled, non-oxygenated fermentation, I would expect it to have higher esters, especially with the oxygen, because oxygen is perhaps the largest known impact for esters. Yeah. So you did rack aggressively, so you hopefully had about 8 ppm in there. But yeah, I would thought it would be kind of high in esters, and I would think it'd be kind of thin in body, and potentially. Well, you already said when you racked it over, it wasn't cloudy, but I would have thought you would have brought over a lot of unfermented starch too. Yeah. Not a lot, because it's not like there's tons in oats, but at least a little bit. Yeah. But some of that can probably settle out during fermentation and then, kegging, lagering. Sure.
Well, this thing didn't have that much time to lager or, cold condition. My biggest concern was the thin and watery thing. I mean, while brewing this batch, that was my biggest concern. And so I sort of expected that.
I've made, milds, but they usually have a significant amount of caramel malts in them. Yeah. But I've made milds and Scottishes in the 2 to 3 range, and they're delicious. Yeah. So.
No, I agree. I like them too. What about the fact of the water chemistry? I mean, I added 10 grams of calcium chloride to kind of maybe keep it within range. Did you think there might be anything with that, or maybe the not filtering and the chlorine stuff you might expect?
Not filtering. I would be concerned with chlorophenols, of course. Yeah. So that is usually horrible, and it's I find it a lot in startup breweries, these nanos. A guy or a girl starts a nano after winning a honorable mention in a competition of 20 people, and then they're brewing out of their dad's garage, because it's zoned for commercial, and every single beer is chlorophenol. So it's the number one thing.
And that's that medicinal Band-Aid thing. It's terrible.
So that one I would assume would be a given. But the chloride, handful of chloride thing, that's fine, because your water is probably fine all by itself. So that's a devil may care. If anything, the little bit of calcium probably helped the fermentation.
I was thinking the same thing. Another thing, the short boil was only a 20-minute boil. You might expect some dimethyl sulfide there, some DMS, maybe a corny, cabbagey type thing. Potentially, like you mentioned, esters and maybe a fusel alcohol warming from pitching into 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees C wort. And then not controlling fermentation temperatures. Again, it was winter. I can't believe that the fermenting beer got any warmer than about 74, 75 degrees. We recently did a show using the same strain, a similar strain at the very least, showing that higher temperatures actually seem to produce a cleaner beer using the fuller strain. So, but at the time, I just kind of presumed that you might expect some esters out of this compared to a more controlled fermentation. I started pouring these beers for people about a week after kegging, and of course I'm evaluating them myself. And my first impression before we get into the results, the blind results that we collected here, my first impressions was that damn, this beer was really, really good. It certainly did not taste like the 2.2% ABV stout, it was not watery. It wasn't thin to my palate. It had a really nice balanced roasted malt character that I think, hate me if you will, Malcolm, but I feel like the toastiness that from the Munich malt, from the pale malt, really balanced out that roastiness quite well. It was a solid drinking beer.
Yeah, I hate no one. Very few people. We won't talk about that now. But so do what you want. It's your beer. I think Munich would probably be delicious because I love the flavor of Munich. I was just teasing you, but So especially for such a small beer, it probably did add an element of a little something. So it's probably nice.
Yeah,
with the maltiness. I don't know if I want that in my Guinness clone, but I might welcome it if I'm going for that Cork Irish Stout. So
sure.
Cool.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was good. And for me, the most surprising thing was the fact that the mouthfeel had kind of this moderate body. It was quite pleasing to my palate. But of course, those are just my very biased thoughts. I served this beer to 15 people who were given absolutely zero information about the beer, about the brewing process, about the style, nothing. They just received a glass of dark beer and were asked to complete a simple survey. So the first question that we asked these people is to attempt to identify the beer style, which is much more difficult than folks might think. We've kind of revamped the short and shoddy survey at this point, but at the time, I literally just listed every single BJCP style and asked people to try to find the one that they thought this was. While nobody correctly selected Irish Stout, one person did think it was an Irish extra stout, and everyone else did select some sort of dark style. Probably the most off one was a Rauch beer, which is still fairly, I think people kind of misinterpret roasty with smoky sometimes, a little bit of whisper of smoke. The most common selection was American Porter, which interesting to me that's a fairly high gravity relative to a Irish Stout, a fairly high gravity style, which seems to support my experience that the beer was not thin in body. In fact, it was full enough to fool people into thinking, it was an American Porter. 4 people out of 15 selected American Porter, and then there was a whole bunch of others who picked some sort of a stout. So not too bad there. I don't think, in terms of being able to look at the beer through the glass, I don't think it's terribly surprising that people were selecting darker beers.
Yeah, I wonder if the Munich and the honey malt threw them off on Porter.
I that might be it. I honestly think that the way that the survey was designed back then, or that question on the survey, it just, you serve somebody a pale ale and you tell them, tell me what style this is right now. You're still going to get a pretty wide ranging swath of responses on that. That's been my experience at least.
And they'll also pick one they recognize and jumps out at them. So if you could do a pale ale and it was pretty assertively hopped, they might call it an IPA, and I bet because the style is so popular, you probably get a lot of IPA.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that kind of similarities between porters and stout, like we were talking about earlier. So not surprising that people were selecting different variants of stout and porter and whatnot. But tasters were then asked to rate how hoppy, malty, and dry they perceived the beer to be, and the ratings were then averaged from there. So overall, tasters perceived this beer as being quite dry and malty, with average ratings of about 3.8 and 3.5 out of 5 respectively. So 3.8 out of 5 on dry and 3.5 out of 5 on malty. The average rating on hoppiness was about 1.9 out of 5. I don't know about you, Malcolm. That sounds about right to me for an Irish Stout.
That looks right.
Yeah.
I was pretty, I thought, American Porter was pretty close with the ingredients, and I think the dry attenuated, then malty. And how would you describe? Would you describe an Irish Stout?
Exactly. Well, exactly.
It's a well attenuated, malty, roast forward beer with almost no hops.
That question alone kind of seemed to jibe quite well with what I expected from an Irish Stout. We then had each taster rate specific descriptors for each of those characteristics: the dry, hoppy, and malty. So when it came to hops, 5 people each noted earthy and spicy as being the most prominent. Completely unsurprising to me. Right. And totally in line with Irish Stout, in my opinion. The other 5 kind of were spread across fruity, pine resinous, floral. Again, that one's not terribly surprising. And dank caddy. That's people ask me about this one. To me, dank caddy smells like weed. So that I don't know how people got that, but one person got that one. Or
you don't know what kind of weed they're smoking, man. You don't judge.
Or smelling at the very least. Yeah. For malt, 10 out of 15 tasters felt that roast was the strongest characteristic. Awesome. 2 people each noted toast and nutty. So there's your 14. Those don't surprise me at all. A toasty kind of nutty characteristic. Roast took the cake in this one, in my opinion, as well. But there was a nice toasty nutty thing in the background. And then one person endorsed chocolate. So none of those are terribly surprising to me. The malt character was right on.
That's in line too.
Yep. And then as far as fermentation characteristics or yeast characteristics go, clean was marked by 6 out of 10 participants. So it had a really clean fermentation characteristic. Esters came in second with 5 votes. So some people seem to be picking up on what you noted, Malcolm. Again, this was the fuller strain. So this was not the darkness strain or the Guinness strain, if you will. This was actually Fuller's, which is used for their ESB down in London. But again, people talk about that strain kind of putting out some esters and whatnot. So this one did not surprise me very much at all. And then phenolic and sulfur both received 2 votes. And again, I don't know if people were mixing up I got no phenols whatsoever out of this, but people might maybe mixing up. I have this theory that some people kind of perceive a high level of roast as sort of smoky, and smoky is a common descriptor for phenols. I don't know.
That sounds about right. I think if someone wasn't attributing the smokiness to roasting malt, and here they are blind in this vacuum trying to think of things and thinking like, I wonder if this is a phenol test or something like that,
Yeah.
So they just kind of, they pick something that looks familiar. It's almost like I picked a DMS or astringency because I picked up something that's not right, and that's a word I know.
Yeah.
But man, the Fuller strain, like so I'm studying now for advanced Cicerone. If you put a Fuller's beer in front of me, I can usually pick it out. It's a very signature yeast. It is very signature. So the fact that some people thought it was clean, it's very interesting to me. I don't know if it's the low gravity or we have to figure out if you overpitched, whatever. That's cool. It's neat that people thought it was clean.
Yeah.
Because it's usually like, has like these cooked fruit flavors.
Well, if I were to do this survey, I would absolutely have selected clean. To me,
yeah, cool.
but a part of it is that I think that roasted malt character really does get in the way, or roasted grain character, I'm sorry, really does kind of get in the way of any of the more subtle esters that the Fuller strain might put out. But like you said, and we talked about this in the ale fermentation temperature episode recently, that it could be, the ester production could be a function of gravity as well, and this was very, very low gravity. So perhaps that played a role.
Hey, audience listening, go try Fuller's Porter tomorrow. It is roasty, and it is full of these dark cooked fruits, almost like cherry and leather. It's amazing. But go try it. After reading this, listening to this. But yeah, Fuller's Porter is roasty. I think if you served it to most people, they would think it was a fruity stout.
Yeah, that's a delicious beer. I love it as well.
Oh, it's amazing beer.
We then asked the participants to if they perceived any off flavors. Only 2 out of the 15 people reported perceiving off flavors. One felt the beer had a metallic thing going on, and another person noted some astringency. I didn't pick up either of these, but again, I brewed the beers. Maybe I just wanted to feel good about myself. But again, it was only 2 people, so I don't know. Is there any chance the brewing process might have been responsible for producing a metallic or astringent character?
I mean,
I don't know.
Usually metallic's going to be equipment, like a non-coated metal, or it could be, high iron, I guess, in water, but probably not.
Yeah.
That's probably an association with the roast, and sometimes hops can give a metallic taste.
Yeah, I've also
not Perla.
I've also heard that you can get kind of or some people can perceive a sort of metallic thing in just really high mineral content beer. So if you're throwing a ton of minerals, I didn't do that. So
yeah, well, high English and high noble hops can give metallic too.
Okay, that's interesting.
But it's unusual.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure if there were any off flavors there. I didn't detect it, so in my mind there weren't any. Participants were then asked to rate how much they enjoyed the beer on a 0 to 5 scale, where 0 meant not at all and 5 meant extremely. 4 people marked 1. 3 people gave it a 2. 6 people gave it a 3. 2 folks marked 4. and nobody gave it a 5 out of 5. Rarely people
Well, it
do.
sounds like Untapped.
Well, and that's the thing, that this is a really subjective question, as totally a function of one's opinion of the style overall, not necessarily a good indicator of the beer's quality. And that's why we asked participants, or we always ask when we're doing these short and shoddy surveys, to rate the beer on the same 0 to 5 scale as to how representative of the target style the beer is. And we often see a difference between, how much they enjoyed it and how representative is of the style. And that's what we saw here. 2 people thought that it was exactly spot on, gave it a 5 out of 5 rating. So even though they may not have enjoyed the beer very much, they thought it was spot on with Irish Stout. 5 people gave it a 4 out of 5. So there's 7 out of 15 already. Another 5 people felt it was pretty close and marked a 3 out of 5. 1 person gave it a 2, and 2 people rated it as a 1. Nobody said that it was completely out of style. So I thought that was pretty good. I mean, you got 7 out of 15 people who were saying, yeah, this is a pretty solid example of an Irish Stout. And they still, at this point, have no idea what the beer is, have no idea what the ABV is, nothing like that. So I thought it was pretty interesting that they thought it was fairly close.
And that's a good representation, well, potentially, if it was good. I'm assuming it was. But people being able to set aside a bias. So, in judges, I always hate when I'm sitting next to someone or across from someone and they pronounce that they hate IPAs while they're judging IPAs. I'm
my God, I know.
Well, the next time mark it off as you don't want to judge them, But if that person can then set aside and mark a good, what I think is a good beer as a good beer also, I can go, okay, at least you're able to do that.
Yeah.
So here, someone was given a beer and they go, oh, not delicious, I don't like it, because maybe they don't like roast. But then when they were asked, well, this is an Irish Stout, and they go, oh yeah, that's not a bad version of that.
Yeah. Well, and to clarify, right before we ask them the question of how representative of the target style it is, obviously we reveal what the style is. And that's
right.
That's the only reason that we ask whether they enjoyed the beer or not before that question, because we don't want to reveal it before asking them if they enjoyed it or not. I want that question to be unbiased. So we do let them know this was an Irish Stout. I don't let them know how it was brewed. And then they do the rating on representativeness of style. So again, pretty surprising to me. Overall, my thoughts on this beer, I would absolutely brew, honestly, for 2.2% ABV, I'd go out there and I'd have 4 or 5 pints of this stuff and be completely sober. I'd go out and throw cornhole completely sober after having 3 or 4 pints of this stuff and be able to go to bed at night and not wake up with a headache. So I thought it was pretty cool. Makes me sort of want to try it out, not party guile style. But at the same time, this was my first time doing a party guile, and I was beyond impressed with how well it worked out. I do think there's maybe some benefit to adding a bit more pale malt to just bump up the OG a bit, if that's what you're looking for. But all in all, it worked out fantastic. And even though this beer didn't, precisely hit all of the statistics laid out by the BJCP, it was a solid example of an Irish Stout that I absolutely enjoyed drinking the entire keg of.
Yeah. There's tricks to doing this party guile thing. I kind of give a quick answer to say, yeah, I do that. But you can boil longer. You can goose up the gravity with a little bit of extract. Sure. There's so many things you can do. And what I often do is I take off a small portion. So I split my wort, 75-25.
Yeah.
And then I can take that remaining portion. So I make a bigger beer. And I take that remaining portion and I dilute it down to make a smaller beer. So instead of doing the traditional where you take the grain, take off first runnings, and then fill it up or sparge again. Yeah. I collect all my wort and I'll dilute a portion so I can make like a best bitter or even like a wee heavy, and then dilute it down. I usually go darker as I go down because I get like into the dark mild range.
Yeah.
But there's so many different ways you can augment the beer with steeping grains or hopping rates, etc.
Yeah, and this was a short and shoddy, so I wasn't going to extend the boil. I wanted to do that 20-minute boil, but I do think people could probably get away with, boiling this wort for an hour and a half and to bring up that OG, and you'd have an even richer, stronger flavored beer. But all in all, I was quite pleased with it. Well, that is all the time we have got for this show. Again, please let us know what you think about this short and shoddy series by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And please don't forget to head over to brulosophy.com to read about the beer discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other experimental stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.